I had always thought of myself as a devoted mother and grandmother, always putting my family first, always giving more than I ever asked for in return. But somehow, over time, my son Michael and his wife Amanda had grown so distant, so ungrateful. I had spent years raising him, supporting them financially, yet here I was, alone and overlooked. It was that phone call, the one I received just days before my grandson Luke's wedding, that finally broke me. I heard my son's voice crackle through the phone. "Mom," he said, his tone cold and distant. "We all agreed. It's best if you don't come to Luke's wedding." My heart stopped beating. Before we continue with the story, comment where you are watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to get more uplifting stories about women that have been betrayed and mistreated by family members, but still got back on their feet with a happy ending. Now back to our story. I never thought I'd feel invisible in my own home, but here I was, sitting in the silence of my living room. The world outside seemed to move on without me, while the stillness of my house seemed to deepen by the second. It wasn't even the quiet that was the hardest to bear. No, it was the weight of being forgotten. It felt like a hollow echo inside me, reverberating through the walls of the home I had once shared with my family. Luke, my grandson, was getting married. It should have been a joyous occasion, a moment for me to reflect on the years I had spent watching him grow, nurturing him through scraped knees, sleepless nights, and the milestones that filled our family's history. I had been there for every one of those moments. And yet, here I was, left to sit alone with nothing but my own thoughts and the sound of my heart slowly breaking. The invitation had come weeks ago, but there was no mention of me. Not even as a distant afterthought. "No, Grandma, we'll save you a seat. No, we hope you can make it." The invitation wasn't for me, it was for everyone else, the ones who belonged, the ones who mattered. The fancy gold lettering on the envelope glimmered as it taunted me. How easily they had forgotten. How easily they had moved on without a second thought for me. Standing there, holding the quilt I had spent months making, I realized just how little I mattered anymore. I had sewn every patch with love, thinking about Luke the entire time. The fabric from his first soccer game, the soft piece of blanket his parents had used when he was sick, the shirt he wore the day he first learned to ride a bike. It was all there, pieced together to remind him of the love I'd always had for him. The quilt was meant to be his wedding gift, a physical manifestation of my love, my sacrifices, my place in his life. Yet, it now lay like a forgotten relic, a symbol of everything I was to them. Nothing. As I stood there, gripping the quilt in my hands, I couldn't help but wonder how it had come to this. My son, Michael, and his wife, Amanda, had always made it clear, through actions more than words, that I wasn't part of their perfect picture. They hadn't explicitly told me to stay away, but their silences spoke louder than anything they could have said. Their coldness had been a constant presence in my life for years, but I had told myself it didn't matter. After all, family is family, right? They're supposed to love you unconditionally. I had given so much of myself to them, helping Michael when his job was on the line, babysitting Luke when his parents had to work late, paying off bills when they struggled to make ends meet. It was a part of being a mother, a grandmother, a part of being someone they could always turn to. Or so I thought. But I was wrong. In the past, I had always tried to fill the void in my heart with the thought that family was supposed to overlook your imperfections. But now, as I stood there, looking at the quilt, I realized how invisible I had become. They didn't need me anymore. They never really did. I had become an accessory, something to be acknowledged only when it was convenient, when it was easier to include me than to explain why I was left out. And in that moment, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I was nothing more than a forgotten matriarch, swept aside in the whirlwind of their lives. I let out a deep sigh, my chest tightening with a mix of sadness and frustration. The phone rang, its jarring sound cutting through the air, but I didn't pick it up. Who was it going to be? Michael? Amanda? Maybe Luke, offering some feeble apology or explanation for my exclusion? The thought made my stomach turn. I had already heard it all before, over and over again. The excuses, the empty words that meant nothing. No, I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into accepting less than I deserved. They hadn't wanted me there when it mattered, so I would stay away when they wanted me to forgive them. And yet, deep down, the ache in my chest didn't go away. It wasn't just the exclusion. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to be invisible for so long. I had allowed them to take me for granted, to make me feel like I was nothing more than an afterthought. I looked at the quilt again. Maybe it wasn't just about the wedding or the family. Maybe it was about me. I had spent so many years in the background, watching them all go on with their lives. But in doing so, I had forgotten about myself, my own worth. The love and sacrifice I had given didn't deserve to be forgotten. It was time for me to remember who I was. Maybe this was the turning point. I would stop waiting for their approval. I would stop seeking their validation. It was time to stand up, to remind myself that I mattered. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time for them to realize that too. When the invitation arrived for Luke's wedding, I could feel the sting immediately. I had been holding on to the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, they would have the decency to include me, if not as a guest, at least with a simple acknowledgement of my presence in their lives. But as I opened the envelope, all that hope melted away. The card inside was beautiful, printed with elegant, extravagant fonts. It was everything a wedding invitation should be. Grand, formal, full of promise. But there was something missing. Not even a hint of it. No, Grandma. No, we hope to see you there. Just a list of names. Michael, Amanda, Luke. And a date that would mark the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one that I wouldn't be a part of. It felt like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let myself cry. Not anymore. The tears had dried up long ago. Instead, I stared at the invitation, feeling the weight of the years of sacrifice and love I had poured into this family. All of it completely ignored. My hands shook as I held the card, my mind racing through the countless things I had done for them over the years. Every sleepless night with Luke, every birthday I had helped plan, every time I had bailed Michael and Amanda out of financial trouble. It all seemed to mean nothing. I placed the invitation back on the table, my eyes drawn to the quilt lying in the corner of the room. Felt like a cruel reminder. The quilt I had spent so much time on, stitching together memories for Luke, was now a symbol of my insignificance. The pieces of fabric that represented milestones in his life, his first soccer game, his first bike ride, had once been stitched together with the hope that one day he would look at it and remember that I was there. But now it lay forgotten like everything else I had done for this family. As I stood there, my heart ached, but I didn't let the sorrow consume me. I had learned long ago that to love them meant to accept that I would always be in the background. But this was different. This was the moment when I finally realized the truth. My son Michael had made it clear, even without saying the words, "Stay away." So I had stayed out of their way, silently enduring their neglect, always hoping that one day they would see me for who I was. But they never did. And now, with the invitation in front of me, I understood. I had become invisible. A ghost in my own family's eyes. It wasn't their fault, really. I had let it happen. I had allowed myself to fade into the background, always giving and never asking for anything in return. It was a role I had accepted, never once standing up for myself, never once demanding to be seen. And now, as I stared at the quilt, I realized I had let it go on for too long. It was time to face that reality. They didn't want me there. But I had been there for every moment that mattered to them. And if they couldn't see that, then maybe it was time to stop pretending that I mattered in their lives. In the midst of my grief, something inside me clicked. It wasn't a loud, dramatic realization, but more of a quiet, subtle understanding. I had been carrying this weight for so long, all those years of sacrifices, of love given without acknowledgement, that it had become second nature to forget about myself. But suddenly, in the wake of this hurt, something surfaced. A memory I hadn't let myself think about in years. Greg had set up a trust for Luke's future. A family trust, meant to ensure that Luke would have everything he needed as he grew. It had been Greg's idea. His way of making sure our grandson had a safety net. When Greg passed, it was a bitter moment, but I knew I would carry out his wishes. He had made me the sole trustee, a responsibility I had accepted without much thought at the time. I had been so focused on taking care of everything else, on being invisible for them, that I had forgotten the power I still held in my hands. I thought about it as I sat there in the silence of the living room, staring at the wedding invitation. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been left out of their lives, forgotten, but I wasn't powerless. I still had control. The power to ensure that Luke was protected. The power to make them see me, if only for a moment. They thought they had everything, but they had underestimated me. They had underestimated what I could do with the responsibility Greg had left me. I stood up, the quilt still lying in the corner, and walked toward the small desk where I kept the papers. My fingers ran over the edges of the trust documents. It had all seemed so distant before, but now it was right in front of me. I had something they couldn't take away, something that, for the first time in years, gave me a sense of purpose. I wasn't just a forgotten grandmother. I was still in control. The office was small, almost quaint, with wooden beams on the ceiling and the scent of old paper in the air. Kate, the attorney who had helped us with the trust after Greg passed, looked up from her desk as I entered. She didn't say anything at first, just a raised brow, an unspoken question hanging in the air. I could feel the weight of the moment, the realization that I was about to change the course of things. Without a word, I handed her the trust papers, along with the new clause I had written. The words I had written seemed foreign, yet so right. Funds will only be dispersed if the surviving trustee is invited to the wedding and present at the ceremony. Kate didn't question me. She didn't ask why or challenge me. She simply nodded and took the papers from my hand. It wasn't about revenge, I reminded myself. This wasn't about punishment or hurting them. It was about respect. The respect I hadn't been given. The respect I had been quietly denied for so long. She wrote it down without hesitation, and as she handed the papers back to me, I felt a small spark of power flicker inside. It wasn't grand or vindictive. It was quiet and simple. But it was mine. The family had forgotten me, but now I would make sure they remembered who I was. The wedding day arrived with all its pomp and grandeur, just as I had expected. The world outside continued to spin, the chatter of the family, the excitement in the air. It was everything I had imagined, and yet nothing at all that I wanted to be a part of. I stayed away. Not in anger, not with bitterness, but with a quiet sense of dignity. They had made it clear that I wasn't needed. And so I would respect that. I didn't need to be part of their curated perfection, their picture-perfect day. I had prepared myself for this, but nothing could fully ready me for the moment when the phone rang that morning. I stared at the screen as I saw Luke's name flash across the display. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected him to call. It wasn't an apology I was waiting for. It was a moment of understanding. But I wasn't sure if he had come to that place yet. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello, Luke." "Grandma." His voice trembled on the other end, so full of regret that I could almost feel it through the phone. "I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I didn't see it then. Can we fix this? I want you to be there." His words hit me like a wave, so raw, so full of hurt. For a moment I felt the old pang of love for him, the little boy who used to sit on my lap, asking questions about everything. But I couldn't forget the years of neglect. I couldn't pretend anymore that his family's silence was something I could brush aside with a simple apology. I had been forgotten for too long, treated as if I was a relic to be displayed only when it was convenient. I let the silence stretch between us for a moment before I spoke, my voice calm and steady. "Luke, it's not something that can be fixed with an apology. Not anymore." I paused, letting the words sink in. The truth doesn't disappear once it's revealed. I've been invisible for too long, and I'm not going to pretend anymore. This is my choice. I've made my peace. There was a long pause, and I could hear the sharp intake of his breath. "I understand," he said, his voice quiet. "I just wish it hadn't come to this." I smiled softly, though I knew he couldn't see it. "You'll understand one day." "Hope you do. But I won't be part of the show today, Luke. Not because I don't love you, but because I love myself enough now to walk away when I'm not treated right." I hung up the phone and set it down on the table beside me. I didn't need to say more. I didn't need to try to explain things that he wasn't ready to understand. The truth had been spoken, and I had set boundaries that were long overdue. As the ceremony began, I sat on my porch, wrapped in my shawl, the afternoon sun warm on my skin. A cup of tea rested in my hands, the warmth of it grounding me. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the quiet wash over me. It was a peace I hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long time I felt free. While Luke exchanged vows with his new wife, I had my own moment of clarity. This was my life now. No more being a doormat. No more sacrificing myself for the sake of others. I had reclaimed my voice, my worth. And in that silence, I realized that I had finally become the woman I had always needed to be. I was free. A few weeks passed before Luke came to see me. I hadn't expected it. I had thought that would be the end of it. The wedding, the phone call, the words we exchanged. I had made my peace. But Luke, with all his youthful certainty, wasn't done. He showed up on my doorstep one late afternoon, standing there with his hands in his pockets, looking more like the man he had become than the little boy I used to know. There was no joy in his eyes, no excitement or assurance. Instead, there was something far deeper, regret. I could see it in the way he stood, the way he shifted his weight from foot to foot, unsure of how to begin. His face was older now, shaped by the experiences I hadn't been part of. He was no longer the carefree child who had once needed comforting. He had grown into a man, but not without a price. "Grandma," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of the apology I had been waiting for. "I'm sorry. I didn't understand before, but now I do." His words were different this time. They were sincere, not just an attempt to fix something, but an acknowledgement that he had missed something vital. He had missed me. His grandmother, the one who had been there for him in ways his parents never could. The one who had always quietly supported in the background, while the rest of the world took center stage. I studied his face for a long moment, taking in the sadness in his eyes. He didn't need to say more. I didn't need him to say more. In that instant I knew that he understood. But I wasn't looking for forgiveness. That wasn't why I had kept my distance. I wasn't asking to be included in their lives again or for him to come to me with open arms. I had been left out too long to go back to that place. No, what I needed from him was simple. I needed him to see the years I had spent supporting them, sacrificing myself without asking for anything in return. I needed him to understand the depth of the love and effort I had poured into their lives. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wouldn't forgive easily either. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I wanted him to fully grasp the truth of the situation. I motioned for him to sit down, gesturing to the chair across from mine. There was a quietness between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a space that needed to exist for this conversation to unfold. Slowly, I poured tea for us both, the steam rising from the cups like the years of silence between us, waiting to be acknowledged. As I handed him his cup, I began to speak. "Luke," I said, my voice steady but soft, "you were never the problem. I've loved you from the moment you were born. But it wasn't just about love. I sacrificed for this family in ways you don't know. I was always there, but I stayed in the background. When your parents struggled, I helped. When they couldn't make ends meet, I stepped in. I took care of you when they were too busy. And I never asked for anything in return." His eyes never left me as I spoke. He didn't interrupt, just listened. "I gave so much of myself," I continued, "but I was never truly seen. And that's the truth I need you to understand. I wasn't doing it for recognition, but I was doing it because I believed in this family, in you. And I stayed silent because it was easier for me to be invisible. But now I see myself clearly." The words hung between us for a moment. Luke didn't speak, but the way his face softened told me he understood. This wasn't about his apology. It was about the acknowledgement that had been missing for so long. For the first time I felt heard. Things didn't go back to normal after that. Luke's visit, the apology, the quiet understanding. It had been a step forward, but I knew deep down that things would never truly return to what they had been. There was still too much that needed to change. Still too much that had been left unsaid and unacknowledged. Then one morning Kate called. Her voice was as steady as always, but there was an edge to it that I couldn't ignore. "You should know," she said. "Luke's parents are trying to reverse the changes you made to the trust. They're pushing back hard." At first, I felt the familiar flicker of frustration, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something much more powerful. I wasn't worried. Not anymore. The truth had been spoken, the weight of my silence had been lifted, and now they would have to face the consequences of their actions. I had long accepted that they didn't see me, that they never had, but this time they couldn't ignore me. This time the power was mine. They were trying to undo what I had done, but I knew deep in my bones that they wouldn't succeed. They would never understand the magnitude of what I had done for them, or the depth of the sacrifice it had taken to get here. And that's when I made a decision. Final one. I took the wealth that had once been meant for Luke's future and redistributed it. But not to him, not to his parents either. Instead, I gave it to the ones who deserved it most. I gave it to the people who had worked in the background just like I had once done. The unsung heroes, the ones who never got the recognition they deserved. The women who worked day in and day out in shelters for abused women. The nurses who tended to the sick without asking for more than a thank you. The teachers who sacrificed their own time to help children in need. These were the people who truly deserved the help, the recognition. And I was going to make sure they got it. I didn't just stop there. Changed my will. I left everything I had to them. Everything. The wealth that had once been a promise to my family was now going to those who needed it most. Michael found out, of course. He was furious when he realized what I had done. He called me, demanding explanations, as though I owed him anything at all. But I didn't owe him answers. Not anymore. "This is my choice," I told him calmly. "And I don't need your approval." He raged, but I stood my ground. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. He could shout all he wanted, but I wasn't the woman I used to be. I wasn't going to back down, not for anyone. Few days later, Luke came again. This time he brought flowers. His apology was genuine, and I could see the sincerity in his eyes. But I didn't need to hear it anymore. I wasn't looking for forgiveness. I wasn't asking for anything. I needed him to see what I had done, not just for him but for the people who had always been overlooked. I needed him to understand what it meant to give, and what it meant to take a stand. When he left, I sat quietly for a while, staring out the window. I wasn't angry anymore. The weight of it all had lifted. I wasn't burdened by the past, by the things they had never understood. I had reclaimed my life. The decision I had made was mine alone, and that, in itself, was the greatest gift of all. I was free.